It's always hard, of course, politically to enact a tax increase, but for the wealthy themselves, is that more reasonable to expect that that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen over the last several years, especially in the Democratic Party, is that there is a strong desire to tax kind of wealth because they don't believe that the current income taxes are providing an income tax rate high enough to kind of capture exactly what they want from that segment, as well as kind of fill in any of the budget holes that exist. So from a Democratic talking point, he's right on target. And, what we've seen here, too, is that, Senator Warren, Senator Sanders really led with a wealth tax. One of the ways in which you can do a wealth tax without kind of a tax on assets is an increase in kind of investment taxes. So I do think that's going to be core to the Democratic platform going forward.
So, Robert Frank, President Trump has talked about looking at cuts for these taxes. What is the truth here when it comes to capital gains taxes and what each of them has said and what their policies look like, and how much would it matter?
Well, the truth is that Joe Biden, even though he's portrayed as a moderate, is offering the most expensive Democratic tax plan that we've seen from any Democratic candidate in recent history. Hillary Clinton's total plan was $1.5 trillion. Biden's plan is $4 trillion. And basically, it's because he's raising the ordinary income tax rate on, as he said, those who make more than $400,000. He's raising the capital gains rate to be 39.6 from 20%. That is by far the biggest capital gains tax increase ever. And then he's raising the corporate income tax rate from 21% to 28%. Add all of that together, it's $4 trillion in spending, 1.5% of GDP. That would be a 1.5% decline in GDP over 10 years. And the question is not so much, is this what the Democratic Party wants? Because of course it is. But is this the right time to do it? And I was a little surprised that Biden basically said, yes, no matter what's happening in the economy, we want to raise taxes on the wealthy and corporations and at least keep the middle and the bottom flat, if not have some of these gains helping those programs.
Well, so let's hit the corporate tax rate, because Biden did weigh in on this as well, and whether he would repeal them, President Trump's corporate tax cut, if elected. Here's what he said.
The corporate tax rate, I'd move back to what I had proposed at 28%. What we had proposed at 28%, because I want to make sure that we see that these corporations, that's not going to take them under. What jobs have they created if we give them more of a tax cut? The president's talking about a greater tax cut for corporations. You tell me what you think, how many jobs that will create in the next 6 months.
What does the research say, Robert Frank, about whether those corporate tax cuts, which Trump took down to 21%, in terms of job creation?
Well, look, the experience, we had a great job market the last 3 years after that tax cut. We also had a lot of that money going to buybacks and dividends. What's interesting about Biden's plan, he talks about the corporate tax rate going up. What's interesting is that what people are not talking about is this part of his plan, which is the biggest revenue raiser, Biden's plan, which is getting rid of something called the qualified business income deduction. That hits small business. Any small business owner who makes more than $400,000 a year is hit with a huge tax increase if Biden is elected and he passes this. I don't know that right now, or at least in the fall, is the time when you want to hit small business and small business owners with the biggest tax increase they've seen in years.
Ed Mills, I mean, corporate taxes, we had this debate a couple of years ago, of course, when it came to to enacting it in the first place. But they don't make up a huge amount of the total tax haul. So an increase here doesn't necessarily generate a huge amount of money. And you've got to also, with corporate tax, weigh up the sort of international comparison, where the U.S., even at 21, is above a lot of, say, European corporate tax rates. And you risk then having a separate debate, which is, do we lose companies that want to move abroad and headquarter abroad because of that?
Well, those are all great questions. Whenever I hear the debate about what the corporate tax rate is, I always remind folks that it's a very small percentage of the overall conversation. Are we going to tax things like we used to worldwide, or are we going to keep the territorial system that was established as part of the Trump tax cuts? We see in the aftermath of kind of coronavirus, a real desire to have more of the supply chain here in the United States. And so that will be a debate for Congress ahead as to how much do you want to continue that onshoring that we think we need for national security, health, and other reasons, or, as you mentioned, as you raise the rate, how that kind of works internationally as part of the U.S. competitiveness. So the tax code is much more complex than the tax rate.
And Ed, I'm sure you also saw his comments around Amazon. I mean, how much pushback are you expecting for big companies like Amazon, specifically big tech companies, if the Democrats, in particular Vice President Biden, win the election?
Yeah, I mean, so when I saw those comments about Amazon, my knee-jerk reaction was, this is part of a bigger concern that I'm hearing more and more about here in Washington, D.C., that what you see right now is a consolidation of market share among the largest corporations and a real concern about the aid not getting to small and medium-sized businesses. So the conversation about Amazon in a Biden administration, there absolutely will be a continuation and probably an acceleration of some of these antitrust concerns. But this really goes to the heart of how are we helping Main Street?
Ed, doesn't this also just happen to be a conversation? I mean, what can either President Trump, who's also railed against Amazon a number of times, and Jeff Bezos for owning the Washington Post, and Biden here as well, telling them that they have to pay taxes. They haven't done anything illegal. In other words, isn't this all just sort of talk and rhetoric and political scapegoating in a way? Can these governments, do you expect them to actually do anything to hurt Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at kind of some of the key positions that a Biden administration would fill, who is the head of the Federal Trade Commission? Who is the head of the antitrust division at the Justice Department? What type of tax codes are we going to implement? It would take time, but kind of the priorities matter. And, you know, kind of from a stock market perspective, what we continue to get as questions from clients is, if the investigation happens, is this going to be a repeat of what we saw in the 90s, as kind of Microsoft was always under the microscope and couldn't really grow, and it took years before they were able to return to their market dominance? And so kind of DC scrutiny matters, even if it's just part of rhetoric or part of a conversation.
All right. Ed Mills, Robert Frank, thank you both for joining us.